Hello, welcome to my webinar, Addiction and Family Dysfunction in the Mortal Instruments series. My name is Ashley Summers Flynn. I am a writer and a diehard fan of the Mortal Instruments series, as well as the Infernal Devices and every book series in the Shadowhunters franchise. Today I'm going to be discussing addiction and family dysfunction as it relates to the relationships we see played out in Clockwork Angel, which, for those of you who aren't familiar, because I know there are a couple in the audience today, Clockwork Angel is the first novel in the Infernal Devices trilogy. It's about a young woman named Tessa Gray. She boards a steamship all the way from New York City when her aunt, who is her only guardian and relative, dies, and goes to London to join her brother Nate, who supposedly has a great job in London and is going to take care of her. Since it's a fantasy novel, obviously we know that's not what happens. She goes to London and is kidnapped by evil warlocks who reveal that she has a power. So that's the background if you're not familiar with the novel, but most of this will be geared toward people who have read the novel. So just a heads up on that. But the first question I'm going to answer for everybody who may not be familiar is, what is addiction and family dysfunction? So if you will follow me, I'm going to give you a screenshot over here and just kind of go through some of that stuff. So, addiction and family dysfunction. So a lot of these definitions are going to be based on the program Adult Children of Alcoholics and how they defined it. And they provide support to family members of people who have addictions or compulsive behaviors like gambling or religious extremism, and people who are members of families where these things are present. The people who participate in the program are known as adult children, and their personalities and their relationships have a lot of unique characteristics. So I want you guys to just kind of take a look at this list of behaviors that are common in people who come from dysfunctional families where addiction is present. You don't have to study them and memorize them, but just kind of take a look and get a general sense of what is being said here. Basically, a lot of these people have compulsive or addictive behaviors, or they're attracted to people with those characteristics. They can be very judgmental of themselves, harsh critics. They can have delusional thinking and have a sense of denial about what their family and their relationships are like. They can constantly seek approval or be overly dependent on others, have difficulty standing up for themselves. They can be anxious and hypervigilant. They have low self-esteem. So just kind of give you a general sense of the personality characteristics of somebody who comes from this history. And now these are the personality traits of people with addiction. Now when you look at this list, those of you who have read Clockwork Angel, I want you to think of the personalities of Nathaniel Gray and James Carstairs, particularly James Carstairs if you've read the subsequent novels. I know a lot of you will look at this list and think, well, James Carstairs doesn't have an addictive personality, and on the whole he doesn't, but he does have certain traits that, in my opinion, have come up in him because of his chemical dependence on Yin Feng, which is the demon toxin. But Nathaniel Gray, if you look at this list, you can see a lot of personality traits that Nathaniel Gray has. He is definitely impatient and arrogant, and gets angry quite easily. He's the kind of person who has a sense of what he wants and will do anything to get it and doesn't want to take the long road and doesn't want to work hard for it. That's why he has problems with gambling. That's why he has problems with drinking, because of that immediate pleasure. He makes impulsive choices. You'll remember that his choice to join up with the Magister and the Pandemonium Club, he didn't think about that choice. That was an impulsive decision he made because he got into too much gambling debt and decided to blackmail Axel Mortman in order to make up those debts. And then from there, it just kind of snowballed, and he kept making those impulsive decisions. So yeah. Stop my screen sharing there. So I just wanted to kind of give you an introduction to that stuff because not all of us are familiar with it, but we're going to kind of talk about how these characteristics and these relationship dynamics keep playing out in this series. So I'm going to start with Tessa Gray because she is the star of the book, the protagonist. So Tessa comes from a very unique home life. In Clockwork Angel, what we know is that Tessa is a orphan, so her parents are dead, and she has grown up poor in New York City as a member of the working class, being raised by her aunt and with her older brother Nathaniel. So, you know, throughout the book, we learn that Nathaniel had a problem with gambling, and, you know, it's something that shaped Tessa's life. A lot of people might not think, when they're reading the Clockwork series for the first time, that Nate is that big of a deal, or that he affected Tessa that much. But one thing we have to remember is that Nathaniel is Tessa's first impression of masculinity and what it means to be in a relationship with a man, because she doesn't have a father, and Nathaniel is her older brother. So that is something that's very important, and it also colors her romantic relationships with Will and with Jem Carstairs, and we're going to find out why. So go back to thinking about that list of character traits that define what we call adult children or people who grew up in family dysfunction. I think the ones that relate to Tessa the most are somebody who is overly dependent and terrified of abandonment, has denial of their family circumstances, is extremely loyal to the wrong people, attracted to compulsive behavior and people they can pity or rescue, but at the same time, she's also overly independent. In the very first part of the novel, when Tessa is kidnapped, her immediate concern isn't for herself, which it should be, right? Because she's been kidnapped by strangers who are torturing her and forcing her to do magic that she's unfamiliar with. She's not worried about her own safety. She's worried about Nate. And the reason why she's worried about Nate isn't just because she loves him, because most of us know that true healthy love comes from somebody who takes care of themselves first. The reason why she's worried about Nate first is because ever since she was a child, it's always been her responsibility to take care of Nate. Nate has always been somebody she had to clean up after. It says in the book, for example, that every time Nate messed up, every time he lost money in the family or gambled too much, she and her aunt would do extra work to make up the money. She would basically, she would be responsible for him. Whenever he came home drunk, she was responsible for taking care of him too. And, she had to live with that and basically, um, be responsible for Nate. So while she's in this horrible situation, all she can think about is helping Nate and getting to him. And she even says that without Nate, it says, without him, she was completely alone in the world. If no one in the entire world cared about you, did you really exist at all? So, she really has that sense of defining herself by that relationship. So, yeah. And then it's basically that colors her relationships as a young adult woman, her romantic relationships with Will, and also Jem too. So I'm just going to take a quick look at the chat room. I see 4 of you are here, which is awesome. Welcome. I'm very happy to see Donnie, Lauren, Elsie, and Cody. If I said your names wrong, correct me in the chat. But let's see. And Donnie, my sound should not be muted. I'm getting a mic activity green light over here. So I just wanted to check into that. Anyway, so, yes. Also, I just want to pop in and say, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat. You are getting everything that I'm saying a couple minutes after I say it. So if you ask a question and I don't respond to it right away, it's not because I'm ignoring you, it's just because of the magic of the internet. Yes. So, yeah. So that goes into her codependency and how she's afraid of abandonment and overly dependent. Next, let's see. Another thing that she has a problem with is she's extremely loyal to the wrong people, and she is in denial about Nate. And not only is she in denial about Nate, but she's constantly making excuses for him. When he comes to the Institute after they raid DeQuincy's house and set everyone on fire, it's kind of badass. She is sitting with Jem, and Jem asks her, "What is your brother like?" And she says, "He always lived in his head. He never cared about how things were, only how they would be someday, when he had everything he wanted." Then she corrects herself. When we had everything that we wanted. Not that he cared about that. She says that when he used to gamble because he couldn't imagine losing, it wasn't part of his dreams. So that's a very honest statement about her brother, but then she sees Jem's reaction to what she's saying, and then she corrects herself, saying, "I'm not saying it right. He was a wonderful brother." So she makes excuses for him, and later when it comes out that he's a traitor and is actually a horrible human being and not just a playful, lovable scamp who is bad with money and gambling, she tells Will that she says, "I always did know what he was. I just didn't want to believe it. I suppose we all lie to ourselves sometimes." So, as you can see, Tessa definitely had a difficult upbringing, and she had a lot of dysfunctional relationships in her family as a child. But a lot of people might be like, well, that's very sad, and her brother should have been there for her, but what does that have to do with Tessa now? What does that have to do with the Tessa we see falling in love and cutting up automatons and, transforming into vampires? Well, the way Nathaniel brought up Tessa essentially affected her in her relationships with Jem and with Will. I think more so with Will than with Jem, but definitely with both of them. So one of the things that Nate taught Tessa about relationships is that she should love people that she can pity and that she can rescue. So when she's initially attracted to Will and Jem, she's initially attracted to Will. He is rude, stubborn. She thinks that he's a drunkard and going out getting wasted every night. She thinks that he's sleeping around. You know, she thinks in Clockwork Angel that he's basically this person with no family who has all these problems, but she falls in love with him anyway. And part of her, because of the way she's been in a relationship with Nate, in my opinion, feels that she's going to be the Lucy Manette to his Sidney Carton, that her love for him is going to reform him and pull him out of that darkness. So, you know, that's something she learned from Nate, because, Nate loved her and, they had a lot of fun together, but she always had to clean up his mess. So that's pretty much all she knows. Also, with Jem, we don't actually see her really developing those loving feelings towards Jem, I think, until she finds out about his addiction, until she finds out that he's dying and dependent on Ian Fenn. That's when that very affectionate exchange between the two characters takes place, when she says, "I've only just known you, but I don't want you to die." And that's when their relationship really intensifies. Again, because Jem is somebody she can take care of, that she can rescue. And that's part of her character defects as somebody who came from a dysfunctional family, in my opinion. But anyway, let's see. I want to hear a couple responses from some of y'all. Go ahead in the chat, kind of list some of your reactions to this, and what that makes you think. Or maybe, are you surprised? Did you see this kind of dynamic playing out while you're reading the novel the first time? Did you not? So just kind of list some of that in the comments, and just tell me what you think. But yeah, so that's Tessa's deal. Nathaniel has, as I mentioned before, a lot of the classic characteristics of somebody who's an addict, and with the compulsive behavior and the gambling and all that. But one of the biggest things that caught me about Nathaniel was the fact that he won't take responsibility for himself and his behavior. So that is something that really struck me, how he never takes responsibility, and Tessa is always claiming that responsibility when she really shouldn't. So yeah. And also, another thing I wanted to point out as well is the difference between Jem and Nathaniel. A lot of people might find it strange that I'm comparing them at all, because Nathaniel is kind of casted as a villain in this series, and Jem is one of the heroes. But one thing that's important to distinguish is that Jem doesn't see himself as being different from any other addict. And, he says when he's telling Tessa about the fact that he is an addict, because he comes from China where opium is a problem. And opium is a highly addictive drug, and it was a huge problem in the 19th century when the Clockwork series take place. But he says that he used to despise men like that with addictions, and he couldn't understand how they could be so weak. But when he develops the addiction to the yin fang, he finally understands. And what he understands is that addiction is truly an illness, and that it's something that destroys lives and can't be overcome just by willpower. And a lot of people in the book, especially the other shadow hunters, think that, Jem just needs to snap out of it and he needs to have stronger willpower. And that's something that we say about addicts all the time. If somebody is an alcoholic or if somebody is addicted to cocaine, we don't see them as being sick like we do somebody with cancer or somebody with lupus. We see them as people who are bad people, and we treat them as having a moral problem rather than having disease. But Jem is actually very enlightened about that, and unfortunately it's through personal experience. So, and I think even though an unhealthy part of Tessa was attracted to Jem because he was sick and because she wanted to rescue him and save him, I think because Jem has that self-awareness and because Jem knows what he knows about addiction, I think he really helps her to grow as a person and to grow away from that personality and into who she really is. Because, he not only explains that aspect of addiction to her, but he's constantly reassuring her about herself. Tessa walks through the world with a lot of self-doubt, and she judges herself very harshly, but Jem is always there to bring perspective and to offer her a healthier way of looking at things. So I thought that was something very interesting about Jem. The fact that not only does he help Tessa, but he also sees addiction for what it is, which is a disease, not a defect of character. And also, in the chat, go ahead and tell me what you think about that. What you think about addiction, whether you think it's a moral defect or if you think it's something that is an illness, or if you think it's a little bit of both. But, and then the last thing I kind of want to dip my toes into is Tessa's relationship with Will. Don't kill me, because I'm definitely a Wessa shipper, but in this book, I would have to say that Tessa's relationship with Will is overall an unhealthy one. He pulls her in, she catches feelings, she gets close, and then he smacks her away and is cruel to her and mean to her. In Clockwork Angel, we don't know much about Will's family history, but we do know that he ran away from his family. So just that in of itself, that he ran away from his family and left them, hints that there was some problems going on in his past. But despite the fact that Will's always being mean to her and rude to her, she does make excuses for him, just like she made excuses for Nathaniel. She says later that she says, Will cared for her. She was sure of it. Yes, he had been rude to her, almost since he'd met her, but then that happened in novels all the time. So yeah, you can see that she's constantly referring to novels. She doesn't really have a concrete sense of what adult relationships between men and women should look like. Yeah. So definitely her relationship with Nate and her family dysfunction really plays into how she relates to Will and to Tessa. I'm sorry, and to Jem. So go ahead in the chat as well. Maybe talk a little bit about your thoughts and how you think Tessa's childhood or past might have influenced her relationship with these two men. Or maybe you don't think they had anything to do with it, that it didn't color it at all. Go ahead and mention that in the chat. Finally, last but not least, I'm going to go back into the screen share. All right. So, if anybody watching this feels that they are dealing with any sort of dysfunction or any sort of problems in their life or in their family, or if you know a friend and you think your friend might be going through something like this, there are resources for you and your family or your friend and their family. There are lots of hotlines you can call, and there's even resources for adults who feel like they may have some of this dysfunction in their life. So anyway, that is all for me. That is all for this webinar. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned something from it. I kind of have an idea that I want to turn this into a YouTube series where I take fandom novels like Divergent, The Hunger Games, Harry Potter, and of course The Mortal Instruments and The Infernal Devices, and kind of explore a lot of the issues that are happening in these books. And I don't know, I think it might be fun to talk about. So go ahead and write down in the chat what you think. I hope you enjoyed it. And this broadcast feed will be available on YouTube as well. All right. Well, I love you all, and have a great day.